I see the world in patterns and dreams. Read between the lines of what people mean. While they're talking loud, I'm thinking deep, finding treasures in the silence they keep. Small talk feels like walking through glass. Give me real connections that actually last. I charge up alone, but I'm not antisocial, just selective with my energy disposal. I'm searching for a love that gets my quiet away. Someone who sees the depth beneath what I don't say. Who knows my introvert? I'll be strong and true and intuitive, so it dreams the way I do.
I feel the future in my restless mind. Leave the present moment far behind. Abstract thoughts are where I come alive. In my inner world is where I thrive. Don't need a crowd to make me feel whole, but I need someone who understands my soul, who won't try to drag me to every party, who loves my thoughtful coughs and dead inside. When I find you, we'll talk till 3 a.m. about life's mysteries again and again. Comfortable silence, deep conversations, two quiet hearts in perfect combination. That gets my quiet away. Someone who sees the depth beneath what I don't say. Who knows my introvert? I'll be strong and true and intuitive, so dreams the way I do. Yeah, an intuitive soul dreams the way I do.
I've been in love exactly 3 times in my life. And each time, I ran away. Not physically, I'm too polite for that. But emotionally, mentally, spiritually. I built walls so high that even I couldn't see over them anymore. I created distance where there should have been intimacy. I chose the safety of loneliness over the terrifying vulnerability of being truly known. If you're an intuitive introvert watching this, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. That moment when someone gets too close, when they start to see the real you, not the carefully curated version you present to the world, but the messy, complicated, deeply feeling person underneath. And instead of welcoming that intimacy, something inside you screams, "Run." But why? Why do those of us who crave deep, meaningful connections simultaneously fear them more than anything else? Why do we, who can read between the lines of every human interaction, become completely illiterate when it comes to our own hearts? Today, we're going to dive deep into the psychology of the intuitive introvert's relationship with love itself. We'll explore how our minds work, why we're wired for both intense connection and intense fear, and how the pioneering work of Carl Jung helps us understand this beautiful, painful contradiction at the core of who we are. To understand why we struggle with love, we first need to understand how our minds work. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who revolutionized our understanding of personality, identified 2 key dimensions that define how we interact with the world: where we direct our energy and how we take in information. Introverts direct their energy inward. We're not antisocial. That's a common misconception. We're internally social. Our richest conversations happen in our own heads. We process the world by retreating into ourselves, by reflection, by deep internal analysis. But here's where it gets interesting and complicated. Jung also identified 2 ways people gather information: through sensing or through intuition. Sensors focus on concrete facts, immediate reality, what they can see and touch. Intuitives, that's us. We focus on possibilities, patterns, the unseen connections between things. We're the people who can walk into a room and immediately sense the emotional undercurrents. We notice what's not being said. We see potential everywhere, in ideas, in people, in relationships. We live in a world of what could be, rather than what is. This combination, introversion plus intuition, creates a unique psychological profile. We're internally focused pattern seekers. We spend our time in rich inner worlds, connecting dots that others might not even see. We're natural psychologists, philosophers, writers, dreamers. But here's the thing Jung understood that many people miss. This gift comes with a cost. The same sensitivity that allows us to see so deeply also makes us incredibly vulnerable to being overwhelmed. The same intuition that helps us understand others also means we're constantly aware of all the ways things could go wrong. In relationships, this creates what I call the intuitive introvert paradox. We crave the deep, soulful connections that our intuitive nature recognizes as possible, but our introverted nature makes the vulnerability required for those connections feel like emotional suicide. Let me paint you a picture. You're on a first date with someone. They're telling you about their job, their hobbies, making small talk, but you're not really listening to their words. You're reading their micro-expressions, noticing the way their voice changes when they mention their family, picking up on the slight hesitation when they talk about their future plans. Within an hour, you've constructed a detailed psychological profile of this person. You can see their insecurities, their dreams, their patterns of self-sabotage. You can envision exactly how a relationship with them would unfold. The beautiful moments, the inevitable conflicts, the way it would probably end. This is both our superpower and our curse. While they're thinking, this person seems nice, maybe we'll have a second date, you're already seeing the entire trajectory of a potential relationship. You can see how compatible you'd be, what your children might look like, how you'd fight, how you'd make up, how you'd grow old together, or why you'd break up in 2 years. But here's what makes it terrifying. You can also see yourself. You can see how you'd sabotage it, how your need for alone time would be misinterpreted as rejection, how your tendency to overthink would turn minor disagreements into existential crises, how your fear of being truly known would eventually drive them away. Jung wrote about this phenomenon in his work on psychological types. He observed that intuitives are naturally future-focused, always seeing potential outcomes. But for intuitive introverts, this future sight becomes a double-edged sword in relationships. We don't just fall in love with who someone is, we fall in love with who they could become, with the relationship we could have, with the life we could build together. But we also become terrified of all the ways it could fail, all the ways we could fail, all the ways our deepest self, once revealed, could be rejected. This is why small talk feels like torture for us, and why casual dating feels impossible. We can't do shallow. Our minds don't work that way. We're either all in or all out, emotionally speaking.
We want to skip straight to 2 a.m. conversations about the meaning of life, about childhood fears and secret dreams, and the way certain songs make you feel like you're floating. But that level of intimacy requires vulnerability. And vulnerability, for the intuitive introvert, feels like standing naked in a hurricane. This is where Jung's most profound insight becomes crucial: the concept of the shadow. Jung believed that every person has a shadow, the parts of ourselves that we've rejected, denied, or hidden away. For most people, the shadow contains negative traits they don't want to acknowledge. But for intuitive introverts, our shadow often contains something much more complex: our need for love itself. Think about it. We're raised in a world that values extroversion, that celebrates being social, outgoing, emotionally available. From childhood, we learn that our natural tendencies, our need for solitude, our intensity, our tendency to overthink, are somehow wrong or too much. So we develop what Jung called a persona, a mask we wear to fit in. We learn to be socially appropriate, to make small talk, to seem normal. But underneath, our true self,
the one that feels everything deeply, that sees patterns others miss, that needs authentic connection or nothing at all, gets pushed into the shadow.
When we enter romantic relationships, this creates an impossible situation. Love requires us to drop the persona and reveal the true self. But the true self has been living in the shadow for so long that we've forgotten how to let it see daylight. We're terrified that if someone sees our real intensity, they'll run away. If they see how much we actually need them, how deeply we feel everything, how much space we need to process our emotions, they'll decide we're too complicated, too needy, too weird. Jung called this shadow projection. We project our own fears about our hidden self onto our partners. We assume they'll reject the parts of us we've already rejected in ourselves. But here's the beautiful paradox Jung discovered. The very things we hide in our shadow are often our greatest gifts. Our intensity isn't too much. It's the source of our ability to love deeply. Our need for solitude isn't antisocial. It's what allows us to bring our full, recharged self to our relationships. Our tendency to see all possibilities isn't pessimistic. It's what makes us incredible partners for the right person. The problem isn't that we're unlovable. The problem is that we don't love ourselves. Specifically, we don't love the parts of ourselves that make us uniquely suited for deep, authentic connection. Jung's process of individuation, becoming who we truly are, requires us to integrate our shadow. In relationships, this means learning to show up as our full selves, intensity and all. It means trusting that the right person won't just tolerate our depth, they'll be drawn to it. But let's go deeper, because even when we understand our shadow, even when we start to accept our intensity, there's still something else lurking beneath the surface. A fear so fundamental that most of us never name it out loud. It's not just the fear of being rejected. It's the fear of being accepted. Let me explain. As intuitive introverts, we've spent our entire lives feeling different, feeling like we don't quite fit in anywhere. This outsider status, while lonely, has become part of our identity. We've built our sense of self around being the one who stands apart, who sees what others don't, who operates on a different wavelength. When someone truly sees us and loves what they see, it threatens this core identity. If we're not the eternal outsider, then who are we? If someone can actually keep up with our minds, actually wants our intensity, actually values our depth, then what happens to the story we've told ourselves about being too much for anyone to handle? Jung wrote extensively about this phenomenon. He observed that people often resist the very thing they claim to want because accepting it would require them to give up their familiar suffering. For intuitive introverts, our familiar suffering is loneliness. We know how to be lonely. We're experts at it. We've turned it into an art form, a philosophical position, sometimes even a badge of honor. Loneliness is predictable. It's safe. It confirms our worldview. But love? Love is chaos. Love is unpredictable. Love requires us to believe that we're worthy of the very thing we've always wanted but never thought we deserved. There's another layer to this fear. Because we're intuitive, we can see potential futures. And one of the futures we can always see is the end of the relationship. We can imagine how it will feel when this person who sees us, who gets us, who loves our weird intensity, eventually leaves. And that loss, the loss of true understanding, would be more devastating than never having had it at all. It's easier to push people away before they get close enough to truly wound us. This is what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposites in tension. As intuitive introverts, we need to learn to hold both our fear of abandonment and our desire for connection, both our need for solitude and our longing for intimacy, both our gift of depth and the vulnerability that comes with it.
The paradox is that only by fully embracing our fear can we move through it. Only by acknowledging our terror of being loved can we become capable of receiving love. Here's where it gets really tricky. Because we're so good at reading people, we think we know what they're thinking about us. We project our own self-criticism onto them. When our partner seems distant, we assume it's because they've finally seen too much of who we really are. When they need space, we interpret it as rejection of our intensity. When they're tired after work and want to watch TV instead of having a deep conversation, we decide they find us boring or overwhelming. Jung called this psychological projection. We see our own unconscious fears reflected in other people's behavior. But we don't see it as projection. We experience it as truth. The intuitive introvert's mind is incredibly good at creating narratives. We can take 3 small incidents and weave them into an entire story about why someone is falling out of love with us. We can interpret a delayed text response as evidence that we're too needy. We can read volumes of meaning into a partner's tone of voice. Sometimes we're right. Our intuition is genuinely picking up on something real. But often, we're just seeing our own fears reflected back at us. This creates what I call the preemptive goodbye. We start pulling away before we've even been rejected, protecting ourselves from a hurt that might not even be coming. We create the very distance we're afraid of. Jung understood that projection is one of the biggest barriers to authentic relationship. He wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." For intuitive introverts, this means that our romantic relationships become mirrors, showing us exactly which parts of ourselves we haven't learned to love yet. That partner who seems to be judging our need for alone time, maybe we're judging it too. That person who appears to find our emotional intensity overwhelming, maybe we find it overwhelming ourselves. The work isn't to find someone who accepts all of our traits. The work is to accept them ourselves, so we can show up authentically without constantly monitoring how we're being received. This is incredibly difficult for us because we're naturally other-focused. We're always reading the room, always aware of how others are responding to us. Learning to trust our own internal compass in relationships feels like learning a foreign language. But Jung believed this internal work was essential. He called it the journey toward wholeness, learning to see ourselves clearly, without projection, without the distorting lens of our own fears. But here's what I want you to understand, what took me years to learn. Our struggles in love aren't evidence that we're broken. They're evidence that we're capable of something most people never even attempt. The average person can do casual dating, surface-level relationships, connections based on shared activities or physical attraction. That's not a criticism. Those connections have value, but they're not available to us, and that's actually a gift. We can't do shallow because we're built for depth. We can't do temporary because we see the eternal in everything. We can't do casual because every connection feels significant to us. Jung wrote about different personality types being suited for different kinds of love. He observed that intuitive introverts are naturally inclined toward what he called conscious love, relationships where both people are committed to seeing and knowing each other fully, shadow and all. This kind of love is rarer, and it's more challenging, but it's also more transformative. When an intuitive introvert finds their person, someone who doesn't just tolerate their depth but matches it, someone who sees their sensitivity as strength rather than weakness, something magical happens. We become the partners who remember every meaningful conversation, who notice when something is bothering you before you even say it, who can sit in comfortable silence for hours, and who can also talk until dawn about the mysteries of existence. We're the ones who see potential everywhere, not just in grand gestures, but in quiet moments. We notice the way you take care of plants, how you treat service workers, the books you choose to read when no one's watching. We fall in love with your mind, your patterns of thought, the way you make sense of the world. We're also the ones who will love you through your shadows, because we know what it's like to have parts of ourselves we're afraid to show. We're uniquely equipped to hold space for someone else's complexity. the same intuition that makes us anxious about all the ways love could fail, also makes us incredibly attuned to what our partners need. We sense when you need encouragement before you ask for it. We know when you need space and when you need closeness. We see who you're becoming before you do.
Our introversion means we won't overwhelm you with constant social obligations or expect you to be our only source of energy. We come to relationships already comfortable with solitude, already practiced at finding fulfillment within ourselves. This makes us low maintenance in some ways and high maintenance in others. We need less external stimulation, but more emotional depth. We need fewer words, but more meaning behind the words we do share. So how do we move forward? How do we honor our nature while also opening ourselves to love? Jung's answer was integration, learning to embrace all parts of ourselves, including the parts we've been taught are too much. This isn't about changing who we are, it's about accepting who we are so completely that we stop apologizing for it. First, we need to practice what Jung called active imagination, getting curious about our fears instead of just avoiding them. When you feel the urge to run from intimacy, pause and ask, what am I really afraid of here? What story am I telling myself? Is this fear based on present reality or past wounds? Second, we need to learn to communicate our needs clearly, instead of expecting people to intuit them. Yes, we're good at reading others, but not everyone has our skill set. We need to practice saying things like, I need some time to process this conversation before I respond. Or, when I'm quiet, it doesn't mean I'm upset. I'm just thinking. Or, I show love through deep conversations and shared silence, more than through constant communication. We need to practice self-compassion for our complexity. We're not too much. We're just much. And the right person won't want us to be less. They'll want to explore the depths of who we are. Jung believed that every person we attract is a reflection of our own psychological state. If we keep attracting people who can't handle our depth, maybe it's because we haven't fully accepted it ourselves. When we truly embrace our intensity, our need for meaningful connection, our tendency to see layers others miss, we start attracting people who value these qualities. Fourth, we need to reframe our sensitivity as a superpower rather than a liability. We don't feel too much. We feel accurately. We don't think too much. We think deeply. We don't need too much alone time. We need exactly the amount of alone time that allows us to show up fully in our relationships. Finally, we need to trust the process. Jung wrote extensively about synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that seem to guide us toward what we need. For intuitive introverts, this often means trusting that the right person will appreciate our peculiar brand of magic. The person meant for you won't make you feel like you need to tone yourself down. They won't make you feel guilty for needing space or time to think. They won't interpret your emotional depth as drama or your quest for meaning as pretentiousness. Instead, they'll be curious about your inner world. They'll ask follow-up questions to your philosophical musings. They'll appreciate the way you notice details others miss. They'll understand that your love is quiet but oceanic, that your commitment runs deeper than words can express. I started this video by telling you about the 3 times I've been in love and how I ran away each time. What I didn't tell you is that I'm learning, slowly, to stay. Not to stay in relationships that don't serve me, but to stay present to the possibility of love itself. To stay open to being seen, even when it feels terrifying. To stay curious about my own heart, even when it seems too complex to understand. Jung spent his life studying the human psyche, and his final conclusion was beautifully simple. The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are. For us, the intuitive introverts, the deep feelers, the pattern seekers, the quiet ones with loud inner worlds, this means accepting that we love differently, need differently, connect differently. And that's not a bug in our programming. It's the feature that makes us irreplaceable.
The world needs our kind of love. The slow, steady, see you in the darkness kind of love. The love that pays attention, that remembers, that notices what others miss. The love that's willing to do the work of truly knowing another person, shadow and all. So maybe the question isn't why we're scared of romantic relationships. Maybe the question is, are we ready to believe we deserve the kind of love we're capable of giving? The answer, I'm learning, is worth the fear.